I called him, and he's tied up with something. He's going to be here in like 15 minutes. So we're good? Okay, very good. Mayor Davey, Councilmember Moss, we're going to get started. We're very happy that you're here, and we're happy for other residents and participants who are taking the time again after how many meetings this week? Before we get started with this town hall and the substance of the town hall, which Amy Easom from AECOM is going to cover, I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview on some key points to keep in mind as we discuss these issues of stormwater management and challenges that we face. One thing to really keep in mind is all infrastructure has a design life. It has an amount of years that it's going to last and it's going to function. And after a certain amount of time, it needs to be upgraded, it needs to be renovated, and investments need to be made. Our system is a relatively old system. It's been around for 30, 40, 50 years. It's aged. Also important to remember is that it's a bit of a patchwork quilt of a system. It was inherited and it's evolved in sort of a piecemeal kind of way over many years. And when you put together patchiness, you put together age, you end up with inefficiency. And so a lot of the ponding and roadway inundation that we're seeing is a result of that. When you add on top of that the fact that environmental conditions have been changing over decades, you end up with an even more vulnerable system. So these are all issues that are having to be addressed now as part of an overall resiliency program that the village is committed to undertaking over the next 10, 15 years. And in 2015, because of observed problems with the system, a hydraulic and hydrologic analysis was done of the system, which resulted in several levels of recommendations. Tier 1 recommendations being easier to address, and they were focused mainly on the deployment of backflow preventers to keep the system from surcharging, filling up with water from the bay. That was already undertaken and done. Second level of recommendations is Tier 2 infrastructure improvement recommendations are more complicated, they're more expensive, they're more comprehensive, and those are the recommendations that we're sort of like poised to tackle now. As a result of these steps that have been taken to date, Council, working with Public Works, made the decision to contract with AECOM to start tackling how do we fix the system. The first step was AECOM looked at the numerical model that was used during that hydrologic and hydraulic analysis in order to understand how it functions, where its strengths are, where its weaknesses are, and where it needs to be improved. That was done. They also looked at boundary condition analysis, which looked at rainfalls and sea level rise, and those were some of the topics that were covered at the last town hall. They also did an analysis of green infrastructure opportunities, where you might be able to include storage in the system so that the pipes don't have to move as much water as quickly. And that was discussed at the last town hall as well. This town hall is going to focus on survey results that were obtained from questions that were posed to people during the last town hall, but also present information on discharge opportunities and discharge deficits, which is sort of how able is the system to move the water off the streets and how much more opportunity are we going to need for discharge moving forward because of sea level rise and other climate related issues. So we're going to cover that as well. Ultimately, all this information garnered from the town halls and from AECOM's work under the first work order is going to be presented to Council in October with the thought that come November, resolutions may be put forward for decisions for Council to make on levels of service, boundary conditions to be selected, design storms to be selected, and whatnot. And then the thought be, okay, ACOM, let's move to the next step and start designing the portions of the system that are most critical, specifically in K8. This town hall is going to be essentially run by Amy. She's going to present the results of the survey. It's going to be a little bit dense. There's a lot of information. We've tried to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. If there are issues, concepts that people want to ask questions about, we'll give you some breaks in between so that you can ask questions or seek clarification. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Amy. She's basically leading the engineering charge on the stormwater system. And if you want, I can fly that, or you have a remote. All right.
All right, thank you very much, Roland. I appreciate that wonderful introduction to a meeting that is going to have a lot of content. So he went over an overview of our first meeting. It was basically done July 29th. It was a public information meeting. We went into what's stormwater, why we're looking at stormwater, how, why. We gathered some information from you as part of the survey, and then we obtained that feedback. And all this information is going to go into helping us determine that design criteria moving forward, and that the public would understand what that level of service is for the system. So there was about 53 attendees at the July 29th meeting. We had 24 via Zoom, and we had 29 in person, and we had 120 people respond to the survey. So that was pretty good. So today we're going to definitely present those results to you, and we're going to present them in a way so that you can understand why we ask those questions, how do they guide decisions as we move forward with the stormwater system. And then we're going to tell you what that means in the next steps, which Roland kind of went over already. So the first set of survey questions really dealt with flood tolerance. So how often do we see flooding? How high is the flooding? How long does the flooding occur? What is your tolerance? So the first question was basically, how often does roadway flooding occur or impact your daily routine? And the majority was basically 1 to 10 times a year. We had about 8% that said no impact whatsoever. So this actually helps guide us into understanding the rainfall events that actually impact your system. The second question is, when it comes to water quantity, which items concern you most? And as we look at the results and we combine the first two, it's about 64% are really concerned about that roadway flooding. So how long it is, what's the depth of it, that's the majority. And then we have some that are concerned about flooding of building products. And this help guides us onto how we're going to set that level of service. The third question is, what's your tolerance for flooding? And the majority is basically, we prefer no flooding, but we can tolerate some flooding into our swells, which is really good guidance for us, because swells, as I tell my other clients, are your friends. It's good for storage, it's good for water quality, and that allows the village to utilize some of that right away to have swells. The next series of questions had to do with public rights-of-ways and private lots. And the reason we were asking those questions is a lot of the public infrastructure, like stormwater and water, sewer, and stuff, are within those right-of-ways. And a lot of residents and property owners don't understand where that line is. So, is that okay? Okay. Yeah, no problem. I hear some background as I'm talking anyways. Yeah, I do. It's okay. So we talk about public right-of-ways. So when we got those survey results, we asked basically, how far it extends to your property. Majority said yes, but we still have, I guess you could say, a major migration. understand what the right is. This will help guide us with design and construction. And let them understand that a lot of that public right-of-way is utilized by the village to actually provide them the level of service that they require or expect. The fifth question is when it comes to improvements that impact the right-of-way, what most concerns you, and it's pretty even playing field. Not very many people care about their mailbox. I thought that was interesting. But everything else that's within the right-of-way, like access to road, which actually helps us with construction, landscaping adjacent to the road, driveway replacement, and sidewalks. So we, there, this way, there, like this, okay. We understand that we have to really take in consideration those facilities that are next to properties. The next question was about upgrading the storm system, and this more has to do with seawalls and what kind of modifications you find most acceptable. And the majority here is we're in favor of raising the seawalls when we come to our outfalls, when we're renewing those outfalls, when we're updating those outfalls. The public basically wants to see the seawalls raised, and you'll see as the consequent, the rest of the questions, that seawalls and sea level rise is definitely important. And this is important to help guide policy, because when outfalls are being repaired, you're going to see this raised seawall right at the outfall, but we have a lot of private side seawall that's going to be adjacent to that. And how do we address those problems? Next series of questions has to deal with climate change. So when it comes to climate change, which items concern you most? And the majority is sea level rise. And this will lead us to the next question, which has to do with sea level rise projections. Last meeting, we talked about a low projection versus a medium projection and a high projection. And the survey results were basically, let's really look at that medium and high projection as we're planning public infrastructure. And as we're designing that public infrastructure, we have to consider the life of that public infrastructure. And typically for stormwater, it's 30 years. So we'll take that into consideration as we choose which projection to use, as well as cost. Because if we have to go with a higher projection for design, that's going to increase the cost for the project. All right, so the next series of questions has to do with the public infrastructure and what can we use. So when looking at elevating roadways to address flooding and reduce the number of pump stations, for the majority of you don't really want to see the roads raised, but I would say this is about a flat line. It's almost like 50 based on. So some want to see it raised, some don't. But for information, if you raise the roads, that could help minimize the amount of pumps that you need to discharge out, because then you brought your roads up to a certain elevation, would guarantee some no flood fixing. And then are you in favor of elevating the roads in combination and making some roadways one way to expand the area for green infrastructure? Majority says yes. I think we love our green infrastructure. We recognize that we need it for storage. We recognize that we need it for water quality. And a one-way road is an option for us when it comes to design. And then this question is if elevating the roads occurs adjacent to your property, what are you concerned with? And most of it was property drainage. Yes, when we raise a road, we got to consider how we're going to drain the property. Another thing that we have to think about is the floor to area ratio when it comes to buildings, because some properties could then play with that, add more storage on site, which then reduces the impact to the system that could potentially reduce the amount of cost in the system. Next series of questions is about water quality treatment. We talked about nature-based solutions versus gray solutions. First part is the nature-based solutions. Which one do you prefer? The majority like the rain gardens. They're pretty, they have vegetation in it, they provide storage, they provide water. when it comes to water quality treatment, are we okay to use gray? The majority says yes. And those, if you remember, are those solutions that are in line with the storm system. So you may see a water quality separator next to a pump station, next to, stay in line. It can also be in with the catch basins. And then the last item with the solutions, the green infrastructure solutions, we gave you some selections on paving. The first one was talking about what kind of paving would you prefer. The majority of you like the cellular concrete pavers. When it came to channeling, it's about equal. So we're good with the additional storage, but we prefer the stone. And then for storage, again, rain gardens win. 76% like the rain gardens, and so these are items that will guide us into the design decisions. And last survey results was what is most important to you, and it's not surprising to see these results. The first one is basically risk to property. That is definitely the majority, and then second up is how are we going to fund it, and then sea level. So right now, I'll take a little pause if anybody's got any questions on the survey results.
Yeah, I think one of the elements that's really important is the funding, because I think maybe people's decisions would be different, because I guess it's some of the questions don't have the cost basis in it, right? And maybe some, of course, nobody wants any flooding, but if that costs $2 billion versus having 4 hours of water that costs whatever $30 million is a big difference. So I don't know. I guess that may be when council starts looking at the different options. Are you guys going to look at different levels of service and tell us like this is what the difference in price would be if you could see different levels?
I don't have enough of that detailed analysis to be able to tell you that.
Okay.
What I can tell you is, definitely when you go with a higher projection, that's going to increase your cost because you don't have to have bigger infrastructure to push against the water that's coming out. So the higher the water, you're going to have to deal with that. Raising roads, although there is a cost to that, there's a benefit that you could reduce the pump station or the bigger size pipes that you may need to build. There's also lots of business cases which will get into a plan of what, from a community standpoint, the benefits versus cost is, from a situation when you actually implement this kind of infrastructure. But you could either utilize the rule of thumb or what a lot of the agencies.
And the second question I have is raising the streets. I was a little shocked that the no was higher than the yes. And I think in the questioning, the way that it's written, it's a little bit confusing because I think a lot of people worry about if you raise the streets, that means water is coming into my house, especially if houses are older and lower. So one of the questions I have is if you do raise the streets, is there a way to displace the water in a way that it doesn't come back to the houses? I don't know if it's through pervious concrete or pervious asphalt, streets, different type of swells. Do you know how that would be done?
Well, depending on how that
So what I'm getting to is that if the question said that, protecting, or designing it to raise streets while designing it so that water would not enter into your house, would you be in favor of raising the streets? And I think maybe you might get a different outcome because I think a lot of that is pushed down because of people who worry about that. But if they know that there would be a solution to it, they may have a different answer. And then the third thing, and I don't know if this is much of a question, but I know you brought it up. We are looking into possibly zoning code, giving bonuses and credits for people to put drainage systems in. And I also brought up last year that we should set up some type of ordinance that would actually credit people on the stormwater bill if they can put an engineering system that's above and beyond what's even required because it can take off the demand and the cost of the system going in. So is this something that when we're design, we should be calculating something like this, or do you think this is a good ordinance that we should be putting forward?
Then that municipality so yes, great idea. That because as you're raising the house pad, that gives you more leverage to actually put exfiltration because you'll be able to have more storage for that water.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Survey results? All right, the next series of our meeting is to actually explain how we're going to use these results to help guide the survey. And we're going to go over rainfall events with local service, establishing that tailwater condition, which is that elevation of Biscayne Bay that we want to design our infrastructure, which then ties into sea level rise. How much higher do we need to design our infrastructure for? Establishing, looking at different infrastructure options, and then as well, a discharge opportunity, looking at where's the village's deficits are, where can we improve, and then how much more do we need to do. So the first one is establishing rainfall events for roadway level service. So when I go back to level service, when a rain event occurs and it's 3 inches, and that road is designed for a 3-inch rainfall in 24 hours, and there's no flood. So that's an expected level of service. So we know that the village gets 55.4 inches a year. And over the past 3 years, the village has been collecting rainfall data, and the maximum daily rainfall that they've received is 3.5 inches in a 24-hour period. NOAA said that they had about 5.44 inches in the area, so there's a little bit of a difference there. And when we were looking at the survey results, we noticed that 55% of the landowners said that it impacts them 1 to 10 times a year, and that 64% are mostly concerned about roadway flooding. So we understand for a level of service, we definitely have to look at something that the residents and the public understands that the road should not flood during X storm. And then when looking at the daily rainfall, we know that Miami-Dade County standards and South Florida Water Management, they require no flooding of the crown of the road, and the crown meaning center line of the road, the highest part of the road, for a 5-year, 24-hour event, which happens to be 6.54 inches. So if the village decides to move forward with that same level of service that is very consistent with the area, you may, entertain that, knowing what kind of rainfall you get during the year. The next design criteria is basically establishing that tailwater condition. So what elevation of Biscayne Bay do I need to worry about when I design the stormwater infrastructure? And we know that the Southeast Climate Compact actually recommends a medium high water of 0.15 feet in AVD. And we know that the most recent king tide was 2.18 feet in AVD. So when we take a look at the tides and that historical information, our starting point we're recommending is 2.07 feet in AVD as a starting point. Now remember, you've already put a lot of infrastructure in for tide flex valves to kind of keep that water from coming in, but this gives us that starting point of where we're going to start our design. So then we have to take into account sea level rise projections on top of that. So if we were to look at the survey results, if we look at the survey results, they're about 50-50 on using the NOAA high versus the NOAA intermediate high. So that's 25 inches, 32 inches. Again, that's for a 2050 projection. So if we have a 30-year lifespan on our stormwater infrastructure, we would have that projection. And we know that the Southeast Florida Climate Compact actually recommends using that intermediate high, which is the 25-inch in 2050. So we would recommend using the same intermediate high. But if the village decides to go with that higher projection, just keep in mind the cost will increase as we have to utilize more higher projections. The next type of infrastructure to look at is seawalls. So when it comes to repairing the seawalls, when it comes to modifying those outfalls, the majority of you wanted raising the seawall to even accommodate the future projections. So, and also the majority like the living shoreline. So the picture on the bottom is an example of a living shoreline next to a seawall. And the one to the top can show you the difference of raising the seawall to an appropriate elevation. So remember that Miami just passed an ordinance to be at 6 feet in AVD. Miami Beach is at 5.7 feet in AVD. And I understand that the village is also entertaining looking at raising seawalls. We talked about raising roads. We saw that there was a slight majority not in favor of raising roads, but you also said, hey, if we have to raise roads, we want to utilize it for green infrastructure. You know, when we raise roads, property drainage is an issue, but it's something that can be mitigated for. So we can go with backflow preventers to the back to the houses. There's ways that we can implement more green infrastructure, more storage. There's just ways that we can make this work. So it helps reduce the cost of the stormwater system if you're able to raise those roads. Okay, so we're gonna pause here, right?
Two questions. The purpose of the seawall, because the problem that we have here is the water percolates from the bottom. So is the purpose of the seawall because you're raising everything else, shoreline as high as all the construction that is going to be coming forward, because it's not going to stop any of the water. Right. So what is your thinking?
So yeah, there's two things. So with the seawalls, if we don't raise the seawalls, then the whole purpose of doing the stormwater system becomes a moot point, because you're going to have water coming in from the bay. It's going to screw up your piping, catch basins, because there's no way to keep it out. So you have the seawalls coming up. Depending on the ground elevation next to the seawalls, we all know that even groundwater will rise as well, which will diminish some of the storage that's within the system. So it's definitely something that we have to consider when you're doing a seawall, when you're raising a seawall next year. No.
If you could go back one slide or two. Sorry. This is to Brett's point. Hey there. So I'm quite familiar with this picture on the right.
Yes, it's sunset.
And there was a moment where there was flooding in one of the stores there, and they had a big problem with the insurance and so on. So that's the thing that Brett was saying, that if we do raise the roads, we have to find a way to prevent that going into houses. Many of the, I don't know how many mackerels we have left, but there's quite a few. And they're at just a few inches above the crown of the road. So the design would have to take that into consideration, so we don't have a situation.
Right.
that
Yeah.
will have to be
Yeah. And what happened here is they didn't have those backflow preventers. None of them, because that was then told to the property owner that we need to take care of it. So they had that issue, and then I think some of them started to put little sump pumps in to get the water back to the road system to get it out. So a little sump pump to help with that. So I think this was an extreme, to be honest, but you know, because a lot of the homes within the village are significantly higher than the road. We have some few that I've witnessed driving around. So it might be an option depending on the neighborhood that we're looking at.
And then the other thing here in this project, they actually put one of the pumping stations right down the center of the road.
Yep.
Would that be something that we would consider?
It would be something that can be considered.
Thank you.
I just wanted to also, like in a really extreme example, like hurricane. Irma came. I have friends who have houses in Key Biscayne, and the water, you can see the line. It stopped inches from going into the front door. And I know a lot of them are thinking, well, if we raise the road even just a little bit, a big storm came, maybe things weren't working correctly, but that have just gone over. I think that's a little bit of that word. So I think one of your questions was that you have to go neighborhood by neighborhood to see.
We'd have to really look at it
not.
and see. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's different solutions that you can use. And I think in one of our later slides, you know, when you're looking at resiliency and climate adaptation, it's not just the village's responsibility, but it's also the homeowner's responsibility. So if there's things that they can do personally on their lot, the investment is great for them as well. And
then the other question I have is, how high are we talking about, right? That's another, because just saying raising street, a lot of people in their minds think they're going 3 feet or 5 feet, and you might be talking about 6 inches, and that's all that needs to be done. And that's also, I think, something that would need to be kind of clarified of what we're talking about. I'm not sure what the rate, or is it something you do over time? Like, do it now and then it happens again in 25 years and goes up again, so it's gradually moving up, or just like this example here, I think it was like 3 feet or something, and it was a huge hit. So I think that's also something that would be a concern as well. Yeah, correct. I mean, right now we're looking at, and you'll see, I guess if I go back to the projection slide, right? You know, when you're looking at all that water that you saw, that's elevation 3.45. So, you know, your lowest road, I think right now is like 1.5. So you're looking at maybe 2.5, at least minimum, if for some reason, just to give up. And then if you think about like the saturation of the groundwater coming into your base rock, then you want to even go maybe another foot higher. But that's a decision that the village council will have to make, is how high are we going to go in order to reduce pumps, reduce the bigger, you know, pipes, and still be able to get the water from east all the way to the west to the bed. So you're saying that in the lowest areas, we'd probably be looking somewhere between 1 and 2 feet higher than what's there. And in the higher areas, it may not be as dramatic because you're trying to kind of level it all out.
Because you're trying to level out. I mean, and I know Roland doesn't like using the word head differential, but in order to get the water out, right, and it's a long distance from east to west, I either have to put like a transfer pump station to get me to one point so that I can reduce the pipe sizes, right? But it's all about head differential. So if on the east side you're at elevation 6, 7, maybe we have enough head differential to bring that water out to the low area, then it can come back.
Thank you.
I just want to add to that. Part of the reason why you guys made the decision to go and do that extensive LiDAR surveying was specifically so that we had a really good centimeter scale accuracy on elevation across the entire village and all the roadways, so that essentially AECOM could take that information and start using it to figure out which areas might require more roadway elevation, which areas might require less roadway elevation, and which areas might require no roadway elevation. So that's something that's coming down the road as they start
crunching the numbers and actually working on development.
And to help with the properties, looking at those finished floors as well, because if you're going to raise a road, if the majority of the road has all their properties at like elevation 8, then we know, oh, gosh, we could probably raise the road in that area if we're only impacting 1 or 2. And that, FEMA set, base flood elevations for a lot of these properties that redevelop. So they're going to, even when they redevelop, they're going to have to bring their property higher eventually anyways. Yeah, it's an insurance savings.
So to continue on what Brett said, would you consider doing this in stages, or is it a better plan to do just all at once? And you go to 30 inches, or you do like one for 10 years, you do a foot, and then 10 years down, you come down. How's your feeling?
Yeah, I guess it would be a tolerance of the properties around, like how much construction they want to see. Or be a mixture of that, or whether you want to just go ahead, get it done and over with. But you got to remember, a roadway's lifespan is 30 years too. So if you do it in increments, you're probably going to keep that lifespan. But the good news is if you put some additional friction force, asphalt, thicker asphalt, it'll make that road stand pretty good for the test of time.
So are you going to be recommending that it be done all in one shot?
I don't think at this point I can make that recommendation. Any other questions? All right, the fun part. Part of our task order is to look at discharge opportunities. When I say discharge opportunities is looking at the existing outfalls that the village has. How big are those easements? What room do I have in those easements to put bigger pipes, bigger infrastructure? And then kind of establish, okay, if I have an existing flow going out, and then I look at what I could potentially put out, how far am I behind the 8 ball when it comes to level of service? So a typical rule of thumb to meet a level of service of no flooding is about 3 CFS discharge, so that's cubic feet per second per acre discharge, typically for an area. And we've used this in Miami Beach, I've used it in Naples, and actually, to be honest, I did the analysis in Naples and then found out that it needs my 3 CFS, so it's kind of like a check. So we use the 3 CFS per acre to meet a level of service of no flooding. And then we determined what those shortfalls were, and then we kind of proposed what kind of facilities that would help kind of get you to where you need to be. So looking at the existing capacity versus the proposed capacity, looking at the basins that you have, the acreage that you have, which is about 800 acres. We found out just for existing discharge capacity, with your existing easements and your existing pipe sizes, and taking into account the low elevation to push the water, at least the west, we determined that you're about 200 CFS. And that if you use the rounded number of 3 CFS, you would need about 2,380 CFS. So you're at a deficit already of 2,171 CFS, which means that's how much more infrastructure we're going to need to get that water out, whether it's increasing those pipes, it's adding those pump stations. This is what we came up with for level service. So is there any other questions on this? Because this is going to be, yes.
What we're seeking in the future is
about. And that's a rule of thumb. Now, granted, it's all dependent on the level of service you decide, right? So if you decide no flooding of roads and this 3 CFS, So I've noticed just from my experience that 3 CFS handled like a 10-year 24-hour storm. So if you decide to do the 5-year 24-hour storm, that one is actually 2.5 CFS per acre, so it gives you a little less for the infrastructure, but that, it depends on level of service. So this is just based off of a rule of thumb that I use. But we can definitely, if council decides that they can do a lesser of a service, that actually helps determine what that is. And the cost, right? Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Because, you know, it says everyday storms, we saw 1 to 10 years, but if there's a bigger storm that comes, you might not.
Yeah, and what level of service do you think we're at right now? 1%?
Yeah,
It's almost off the charts.
oh, well, I mean, do the math. If you're 209 divided by 800 acres, that's but time out on that. You also have gravity wells right now that are being used, and that's not in that existing. So you have some gravity wells, but in the future, they're not going to be a major source of it. Correct. Right.
And the Miami-Dade County is the 5-year 24, right?
Yeah. They're that, but in Miami Beach decided to do 10 years. So they're on 2 different. No, this does not include this. This is strictly discharge. Yeah, yeah, and I'll talk further on how we can mitigate some of this, right? Any other questions? All right, that's fine. Is your mind blown? Yeah, pretty blown. All right, so what are some of those solutions that we can use? You've heard me talk about pump stations. Pump stations typically have some sort of water inline gray infrastructure, right? The water quality infrastructure, whether it's a bar stream, whether it's a vortex, we're looking at removing nutrients, we're looking at removing trash. Pump station pumps into Biscayne Bay because the water elevation is higher. You can consider small pump stations, similar to what the gentleman here was implying. So if you know in Miami Beach, that's Elton Road. So that pump station is within the road. Has 2 pumps in it. It's got, as you can see underneath the pass, there's the electrical panel for the pump station. And here's another pump station that you could have. That's a smaller one. And typically these pump stations, the small ones they're like a sewer station. So it's a manhole, and they have 2 pumps in it. They have 1 pump in it, all contained within the manhole. Then you have the water quality structures that are right prior in line with it. And then, of course, we have to consider with any of these facilities what's called a dissipator box, so that we can reduce the speed of the water, so that we're not creating turbidity and we're not eroding the Biscayne Bay or saving the integrity of the seawalls. We also looked at large pump stations. This is an example of one as well. You see the big box here. You see the electric panel, and over to the right, you can see how you can hide those things. Because a lot of time the public is interested on how you're going to hide that infrastructure, so it's not an eyesore. And that's an example. And like I said, they're bigger boxes. They can consist of 4 to 6 pumps, and they have water quality structures as well. And this for the box that may consider using more of the seawall, so that we could slow down that energy level. I know you can't see this, but so we took all that information. We looked at the existing discharge. Oh, sorry. So we calculated the existing discharge. We looked at
How big are those easements? And they did range from like 8 feet to like 20 feet, I think. And we took a look at those easements and we decided, okay, well, what size pipe can we put in it? Okay. Where can we put it? So this is a picture of all the existing outfalls that you guys have that we could utilize for pump stations. We also looked at, transfer pump stations because we're not going to be able to go all from the east to the west, and where we could have those opportunities. And what we found, even doing this, and these are assumptions, right? We're assuming that the pumps can do like 20,000 gallons per minute. Just making that assumption. Now, depending on the design and all that, we may get more flow, we may get less flow, depending on the location, how much head differential, how much head we have to go through Biscayne Bay. And even doing all this, we came up with, yes, here, there. Well, now we're at the end of the presentation. No. So even by looking at your available room, we still found that we were in a deficit. So even doing all these pump stations, we came up with about 800 CFS, actually more, 900 CFS. So we were still at a deficit of about 1,500 CFS. So we would still need to find more room. So how do we mitigate for that? We mitigate with that with more storage. We mitigate with that with raising roads. We mitigate with looking at personal property. Is there a way that we can have renovators use more cisterns? Is it exfiltration trench? Is it something that could reduce that flow? Any way we can reduce the flow and get some more storage. And you could even look at underground storage, but you'd have to waterproof it because otherwise the groundwater is just going to be which is all higher costs that we have to consider. Well, with this, I think I still had a deficit of like 35, like even with this. No, like I needed 35 more than what you see here. So I'm sorry, I didn't count them all.
The next thing that she's actually going to get into is talking about wells. But the challenge with wells is that while we have wells, that's driven, we're going to lose the effectiveness of those wells because of sea level rise and groundwater stabilization. So before she gets into talking about wells, are there any other questions regarding discharge deficits? Pretty clear, I guess, at this point that there's a big gap that we're talking about trying to fill, and that's really why there's been such a focus in the survey on how do you feel about roadway benefits? How do you feel about the village reclaiming essentially its rights of ways and then being able to use them to create storage in order to deal with this large discharge deficit challenge?
I think you have close to 200 pumps. Does that sound about right?
No. You got 16 there? I think it was about maybe 15 on the other side.
Some of the areas have more than one pump.
Well, okay, so the pump station, it's either a simplex pump, may have one pump in it.
Right.
It may have two pumps in it.
Right.
But these are based off location. The large pumps could have 4 to 6 pumps in it. But it's all about capacity wise.
So how many do you think total?
Individual pumps?
Yes. What's the cost of each pump?
I don't have that number with me right now, but I could prepare that for you.
Yeah.
For council.
Yeah, because I mean, we're looking at options of, do we pump it? Do we inject it? Do we raise the road? What is the cost? Of all those things that we would have to understand. Quick
question.
Yes.
Is pervious concrete for the streets, if we raise them, is that an option to displace water? So when it does rain, you know, we
It
raise
goes
the
straight
streets
into
up,
the ground.
it will go through.
Mhm.
Is that an option?
It is an option.
Has any other municipalities have done that?
A lot of municipalities use it for parking.
Yeah, I see that for a lot for
They don't
parking.
quite do it for the streets because they're concerned with the span of a pervious
Is it
pavement
much shorter?
is like 8 to 10 years, depending on what it is.
Even the paved, the one that looks like concrete, or it looks like asphalt, the one that they actually pave it, not the actual paver.
Yeah, like the pervious pavement.
Yeah, it's the one that they pour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one, it's got an 8 to 10.
8 to 10.
I have a district up in Palm Beach County that's what they do because the landowners don't want to spend that much money on the asphalt, so they'll do that. But then after 8 to 10 years, we'll have to put like an inch overlay of asphalt, and it makes a good base rock at that point. Yeah. Yep. You have to. It's an operation maintenance issue.
No golden bullet, right? Silver bullet, there you go. I want a golden one.
Hi. Yeah, could you give us a sense of what the footprint is for the large pumps and the small pumps? How many square feet they require?
All right, so the small pump right here, although this could change a little bit. This is about, am I in that square? This says it's 56 feet here and about 20, it's like 23 maybe here, but you can change this up. Like this could be a manhole here. Doesn't have to be a little box there. So, yeah, that's about the size of a small pump. It's all underground, all underground. Sometimes with a concrete pad, yes. I was thinking the same thing on the large pump. I was like, well, we could do a basketball court on that.
That was my other.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think about safety and all that, but you might get a little like double dribble on the lid. But,
Yeah, that was my other.
you could think about creative stuff, right?
Yeah, what could we put on top?
Well, right here, this is an aluminum lid. It's an
Thank you,
aluminum
Mike.
lid, so that's going to be kind of hard. But the larger pump station here, yeah, this one's like 54 this way, and then it looks like 35 or something. So, yeah, it just depends on how you do the layout and how big the pumps are. Yeah, this one has 4. See, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it all depends on the pipe sizes too, because if I don't have enough head differential, I'm gonna have to use a bigger pipe to get the water. So it's about pipe sizing.
Are we taking into account filtration that takes heavy metals out, that filters this water before we put it back in the bay?
Yeah, I mean, we would be looking at different water quality, like Staffordshire storm scepters.
There weren't any questions about filtration required, like people.
You mean like nutrients and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
well, yeah. I mean, I believe we should be putting water back in the bay that's cleaner than the water we get off the street. So I think that's something I think this community will back. And so I think that's something we want to weigh.
Yeah, and a lot of times these storm scepters are like really limited on the amount of flow. So it can only really handle those frequent smaller storms, but a larger storm, it's going to be hard to treat that water. There's usually bypass. Well, there's other ways you could use chemical treatment. You could add alum. There's other ways you can look at that, and that's something that you're going to have to consider as we do these pump stations.
Also, to that point, we submitted a grant to do a pilot test of a couple different filtration technologies to see what kind of effluent quality we could end up getting from at least a couple different concepts. And then depending on whether it gets funded and what kind of results we get, that's sort of information that we pass on to Amy, and then that would be considered as part of the water quality treatment portion of the design.
But just remember that it's those systems are really good for those frequent events. If we get a big storm, most of that pollutant's going to go out. And you've got pollutants that go out like in your existing system, but the pipes are small. Yes.
Maybe about the water quality. We discussed this a little bit about Naples. The water quality, some of the water quality technologies are really expensive. Chasing a little bit of reduction. Big dollars. That's something.
Yeah, a lot of these systems have that. Yeah, what's the cost benefit of actually implementing something like that? This can go and what's coming out. How much do we need to? How much money do you want to spend to get you like pure water? So again, cost benefit. Right, and it's a combination. So, and you can have different infrastructure to help with that. Like you said, the infrastructure, the rain gardens, up to the vegetation. And when I get to the wells, I mean, you have 39 gravity wells that could help with the water quality because you can connect all those, even though from a capacity standpoint it may not work, but if you get that first flush.
Also, on the pump stations, we talked about it's mostly underground, but you showed it in your pictures. There are elements, all the electrical components that have to be above flood elevation. That has to be raised and kind of, like you said, you can hide it with landscaping and everything, but you need room to do it. And some of the roads here in the village are really tight. That's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, another question, considering locations for pumps. I know when Harbor Park was established, Roland mentioned that was one of the best things that you could do because of the location of the park. It's very advantageous for the large pump stations and for outfall, if I'm correct. And as far as use of parks or planning for parks to accommodate both pump stations, catchment basins, wells, whatever, rain gardens, could you maybe talk a little bit about how we could be thinking about green spaces, parks, and having a win-win for this infrastructure as well?
Yeah, I mean, when you utilize like a large pump station area like that, you could do, passive recreation, be able to hide those power panels and then, think about the concrete structures, although we really don't want people, bouncing balls on the aluminum thing, but you could actually utilize the rest of it because you saw this footprint. It's only 54 by 36. That still gives you room in some areas to do other passive recreation.
What I want to add to that effect is we talked about this before. As potential property purchases are entertained, they need to be entertained in the context of the existing infrastructure and where we may be needing pumps, where we need needing, for passive or drainage. So I totally agree with what you're saying relative to green space in parks. It's just where you require. They're not all as strategically located as one to the other. They're not equally strategic. But yes, definitely we have to keep that in mind as we find opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, the closer you are to either existing outfalls that we can utilize or closer to the west, which are closer to the bay, is more advantage than something on the east side, unless we utilize that for like a transfer pump station to get us from east to west to kind of reduce the amount of raising roads or anything like that.
Hurricane pumps, category 1, power goes out. the system doesn't work.
That's generator. That's
So-
their generator.
So we have a generator, they're centralized, they're next to the pumps. How does that work? They're running.
Yeah, that's
Special
something that
electricity?
in the design you will have to consider. You're going to have generators.
But is it okay? I mean, during a hurricane, a lot of times people are evacuated anyway.
Right.
Flood comes, flood goes, people come back, and usually the water's already gone.
Yep.
However, what the worry is property, right? Because we don't want to flood houses that are lower.
Mm-hmm.
And the question I have is, you know, a lot of us could take the flood if you're in a higher house, just let it flood and we'll come back. We're not going to spend, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars with generators everywhere and trying to figure this out.
Yep.
But the lower ones that are worried, where it's only making inches, power goes out, or is this big trouble for their properties? People raising streets and putting up their systems.
Well, I think if a hurricane occurs, I think that everybody's going to be impacted. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's going to. Right.
But does it make it different if we have higher streets and a storm surge and rain versus and a system that's not on at that point? Because I just want to make sure, because that's an element of the system when it's running and you have higher streets, everything works. But if that's off, is it just the same as it was before, even though you have higher streets? I just want to see if that.
Well, you'd have better access to those streets because they won't be 4 feet, they'd be 2 feet of flooding.
That's fine, but when you have 2 feet of flooding instead of 4 feet,
Then
the water displays somewhere else.
Yeah, and by the time you know, a hurricane occurs, by the time you get back and you assess the area, that's when you can probably bring the generators out to start pumping the water out before residents get back.
Yeah, I guess what I'm just saying is that I personally would rather have the water in the middle of the street flooded, not in the living rooms of low-lying houses. So I just want to make sure that by saying, hey, we have dry streets now, but now you have wet living rooms, that's what I think, like when the survey's there, that's what people are worried about. So, and you're saying that won't happen if these systems are working. I'm just wondering if the systems aren't working, are we in trouble? Or is there or we do have to have some backups running just in case that something goes down.
Yeah, you should have the generators.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you got to decide how many generators and then prioritize those areas that are lower. Yeah, it's all part of emergency management. Right?
Can the generators be solar?
That would be a decision with the council about pricing and what's best.
But is it possible? Like,
I don't think so, but I don't. Yeah.
batteries?
But, any more questions about pumps? All right. All right, we did look as part of our work order injection wells. We recognize that the village has 39 gravity wells that you maintain. They're about 0.7 cubic feet per second to 3.3 cubic feet per second, which is very small. Over time, we understand that with sea level rise and groundwater also rising, that the capacity of these gravity wells will diminish. So we did look at injection wells. We looked at shallow injection wells and we looked at deep injection wells. And then even with injection wells, you're still going to have that capacity diminish. You may be able to pump it down, but you're going to have that capacity diminish, and then you have the mounding effect, which means you push the water down, it also comes back up because it's got not enough room to spread and go out. So the first type of well that we looked at were shallow injection wells, which are usually 80 to 300 feet total depth. We have a lifespan of 20 years. Even with a shallow well, you'd have to monitor the effectiveness of the well, and you may have to redevelop it or rehab it within 3 to 4 years, depending on how much the groundwater rises. So if the tide is 3.45 feet MAVD in 2050, the capacity will diminish. And just for your information, DEP, the state, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, doesn't allow shallow injection wells with ground elevations lower than 6.44 feet. And the majority of the island is 6.44 feet or below. So you could only really utilize this method in like the north part and some of the east part of the village. The village could explore that for water quality. So if you're looking for another way to gain some water quality, it's something that you could explore. But you couldn't really utilize this solution by itself. You have to do it in a combination. And then we looked at deep injection wells. They go from 3,000 feet to 3,500 feet. They have a lifespan of 20 to 25 years lifespan. But you're limited to about 42 million gallons per day, which is 65 CFS. And that's with a casing of 36 inches. A cost for like a 20 MGD well is from 9 to 11 million. And if this price was done like a couple of years ago, so it's probably a lot higher now with construction and materials right now. And we estimated that if we just did this solution alone, we'd be at probably 37 wells, so up to 407 million, maybe. It could be even higher than that with today's prices. And then based off the current space available within the village, we could only estimate that we could do 8 wells based off the space limits. But it's something that you could use in areas that maybe we can't put a pump station or we need some more water quality. It's a solution, but it's not a no solution. Yes.
But the deep injection wells, you have to pump down.
You have to pump down.
So you would have to go.
Yeah, there would be some above ground pumping apparatus. Yeah. But I've seen some that they could put the pump in the manhole and you have to go up deeper. But then you have to consider any infiltration, but we have to make sure it's watertight, just like any vaults for sewer, where you have valves and other stuff. You just have to make it watertight. But yeah, you could put the pump apparatus in the ground and then have it ready. That's a way you could do it, but you still have an electric panel. All right, any questions on that? All right, so what does this mean for the village? You're definitely gonna have to look at moving from a gravity system to a pump system. You're gonna have to expect some upsizing of pipes, pump stations, outfalls. You have to consider raising seawalls, using, raising roads as a part, implementing green infrastructure. But I think the best way of really tackling this is maybe using a combination of methods, not one alone. Looking at the area, assessing it, looking at the elevation, seeing what opportunities are out there for discharge, and doing a combination of methods. So there's been several business cases out there. AFOM just finished one for the 4-county area, Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe. There's a business case that was done in Miami Beach. There's been a business case, there's business cases all at once. So, when we're thinking about this kind of infrastructure, we got to think about that return of investment. It's a lot of money that we're going to be putting into it. Things that you have to consider is what's that expected annual damages? What is that direct property impacts? What are the business and employment impacts? Because if the road's closed, people can't get to their businesses, they can't get to their properties. You look at insurance and property valuation, and then what are the fiscal impacts? And then after looking at that, like do nothing scenario, then you got to look at the cost of those measures. You know, what does it cost for a pump station? What does it cost for the seawall? What is the O&M for that infrastructure? And then you really look at the benefits and the costs and what those ratios are. So the benefits would be avoiding that disaster loss, insurance and property valuation, and the environmental, social, economic revitalization values, and then looking at those costs, the life cycle costs, including construction, maintenance, and operation over the project lifespan. And that all comes to a benefit cost ratio. And like I said, there's been many business cases out there for the South Florida. And, you know, if the community, which is the village, and puts this investment in, you could have a 2-to-1 benefit on your investment. So every $1 spent on your investment, you can have $2 of benefit come back from the community infrastructure. If people deal with their own personal property and they invest on their own property, add that more, the exfiltration trench, anything that they could do, cisterns, anything that they can do on their personal property, floodproofing, that could end up being a $4 benefit to $1 investment for private property, not just the community. And we know that citywide or village-wide investments for even road elevation, storm protection is cost beneficial. And we know that when you put this kind of adaptation into play, that residential property values will increase when you do the stormwater adaptation and road raising. So the benefits do exceed the cost of this. So that's good. And it needs to be done. So what are the next steps in our process? We're going to present this information to council, the survey results to council, try to receive some guidance from council on the design criteria so that we can move forward with the design criteria packages for the whole entire village. And then we're going to discuss the application of these conditions into the first design criteria package for the K-8 school. And then we'll have a third town hall meeting to kind of illustrate how these decisions will be implemented. And that concludes my presentation. So any questions, I will now sit down and have Roland and Jake take.
Amy, at this point, if anybody has questions, I mean, we want to sort of open it up to discussion and conversation. Steve, I don't know if there's anything in particular that you want to say, or Jake. The reality is this is the hard part of resiliency. I mean, we have this goal of doing resiliency on Key Biscayne. This is what it means. It's going to take a while. It's going to require a lot of adapting to construction over the next 10, 15 years. And there are definitely going to be cost implications to doing resiliency. Part of the reason why our resiliency program has been structured the way it is because it's being driven by the modifications that we absolutely need to make to the stormwater system, which then drives a whole host of other infrastructure adaptations, like what do we do to the roadways? And while we're dealing with the roadways, what do we do with the utilities? Do we put the utilities in the ground at the same time? And so it's a very complicated process that we're working with the manager and Jake on to figure out how to sequence, how to integrate all these lines of effort. And we can't do it flying blind. So one of the next big steps that we have as an administration and as a public works department is how do we develop that roadmap, that integration plan that sort of guides and coordinates all these efforts, and then also actually provides a lot of, shall we say, certainty to the financial institutions that we're going to have to be reaching out to get bonds out onto the street, and also even to the federal government and, say, for instance, the Army Corps of Engineers that we're looking to partner with in this long-term federal shoreline protection effort, whereby they would be investing upwards of $120 million over the next handful of decades to implement shoreline protection on the ocean side for benefit between Crandon and east of Crandon, which then they feel they need to know will be secured by all of the stuff that we're doing west of Crandon to deal with the backside vulnerability that could erode or negate the benefits gained from the federal investment on the ocean side. So the need for the roadmap is absolutely there, because it's a very complicated process with a lot of different things that have to work together in order for it to be done efficiently. And so we're focused on that right now. And as far as next steps, well, you know, K8 was a basin that was identified as being especially vulnerable, and people know it, people see it. And so the objective was really to start with that central portion of the village and then prioritizing other basins, each of which then required design criteria packages, basins of design report, which then are used. You go to then do design, build, construct, or design, construct, design. Okay, and so that's kind of where we're at now. I mean, this is the moment. This is the launch, and to the extent that we can get people to come and understand and learn and see the realities, it will make it a lot easier for then council to be decisions that the council needs to make to move this process along effectively and cost effectively and efficiently.
And now's the time to do it, because funding is out there. I mean, getting the funding is out there.
Right. So I don't know who might have any additional questions or comments.
I just wanted to thank you guys. I think it was a great presentation, very professional, very clear and understandable. I know that the team here, Jake, Roland, you guys have been working really hard on this, and the consultants, Tom, you guys are doing a great job. So thank you very much. And made it very clear to us that council can have some tough decisions to make. This is really important for this village. Thank you very much.
When do you anticipate bringing this to council? But you're going to be coming back with recommendations. Right.
Yeah.
Well, no, we need guidance. I mean, I think the entire council needs guidance coming from you. That's why you're here, frankly. And I think that's what you're going to hear from the council when we're all together on the dais. Yeah, I appreciate, as Brett said, I appreciate everything you guys are bringing on us. And this is an awesome first step. And it's a huge step. I don't think people realize just how important this is going forward into the future. But we're going to need your guidance, and we're going to need to understand, what are the ramifications. You talk about outfalls and injection wells, I'm going to want to talk because I'm interested in some injection wells, but I'm also concerned about injection wells. So we're going to want you, but come at us as soon as you can because I want to get going on this as fast as we can and keep coordinating with everything else that we plan to do.
Well, yeah, and it definitely helps us moving forward because we can't provide the service that you're expecting of us without those key decisions.
I would also like to make sure, and if Councilmember McCormick is here, make sure that the rest of the council takes a look at this and watches this so they have a basis. So we're all starting from the same starting point because, you know, it's a long presentation, it's very in depth, and I would rather we're all ready to go into that meeting so that we're not, so I would ask that the manager sends this along and make sure that those who were not able to be here tonight are able to watch this and get questions to you so we can all be informed and we can move forward.
That'd be great. Yeah, the sooner you can get us questions, we can be better prepared for that council meeting so that we can anticipate.
And just to piggyback on what you just said, Jake and I are also planning doing one-on-ones with each council member. After Amy has been able to do the presentation for council in October, kind of laying out all this information, then Jake and I are going to follow up with each of the council one-on-one to dive deeper into it and get a better sense for where the questions remain and where the clarifications are needed. And that's something that's going to October presentation and council in November.
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there that we can supply too.
From a council standpoint, what Mike was saying, there's a lot of different factors that we need to decide on. I don't know if like a matrix that we could understand, whether what projection you're using, which storm you're using. I think money is also a very important factor in here for us to make a decision. What can we actually afford? Difficulties of more pumps, we need to find more locations. Less pumps, we don't have to find locations. And then maybe if you can see all the plus and minuses of almost like a matrix, then you guys are deciding like, this might be the best one that we can actually afford and get you closest to the highest level of service. We would recommend it. I think that would be really helpful for us so that we can say, well, we could shift it over one this way, we could shift it over one this way, we can move up here. But it gives us kind of an area like these are just out of our side and these ones definitely.
Well, I wanted to say something when the council was saying about cost. I think without some idea of cost, we're almost like shooting blank. Decisions that you're making, the guidance, giving to get the ramifications of is it $1 million, $10 million, $100 million? I think there's got to be some rules of thumb. We've used some rules of thumb for what these things cost to help inform the decision.
Thank you. As you know, this was my company's job before you came. I think this report is absolutely excellent. Something definitely that we have to face and have to look at, and just to understand where we're at and how we're going to deal with water. This was a great start. Besides the budgets, I think also part of the council presentation should talk about what funding is available from the federal government, because that definitely has to be part of the only thing that I would add is I would urge the council to really look at the fact of what's happening with our population. We've increased over 2,400 residents, 17% our population is up. And I've always said we're overbuilding, we're overpaving. The lot coverages are way too lenient. So I think that's part of the solution regarding flooding. It's not only what we're doing on the ground, but also what we're doing above the ground.
There's a lot of policy decisions that can be helpful.
And I know Jake's working on that really hard there, but that's very, very good. But thank you very much. I think it's a great thing that we're doing for the council.
Thank you. Yeah, this is so wonderful to see this planning coming together, and it's so excellent. And as you mentioned, implied that, you know, along with this, there is a fair amount of digging and construction, a certain amount of planning involved. So to the extent that we can use your extensive knowledge of how to create quality of life amenities in these areas where you have these concrete pads, and what we can do with this needed space for the underground and above ground infrastructure to have recreation, to have, you know, you see the enthusiasm for rain gardens, tree wells. So that will, I think, you know, soften the blow and provide, you know, something beautiful and something that enhances the quality of life for the residents, that isn't only a view of pumps and pipes, which we love. We love those things. But you know, like you said, you wouldn't want to have people bouncing or jumping on top. Yeah.
But those are the decisions to make your own design, right? Those are things that, but you got to consider, even when you try to implement some of that, the cost may go up. So you got to, again, think about cost and what kind of infrastructure.